Hi, everybody. As we're getting into vacation season, I was planning a drive from Chicago to the Gulf of Mexico in my Tesla. Since there are other EVs I want to buy one day, I started thinking about how well they would do road tripping on the same trip in case I was ever to sell my Model 3. Since road tripping in EV is so dependent on charging time, I thought, what's the best way to simulate a trip like this? Here's why it gets hard. Obviously, a big metric OEMs and consumers push is the max or peak charging rate, such as 350 kilowatt ratings for the Kia and Hyundai Genesis cars. However, peak charging rates only occur for brief periods in most EVs. After some time at peak rates, the charging rate drops to something lower and you have to factor this into your road trip plan. Thankfully, you can usually find what is known as the charge curve for your car based on what other people have measured. For example, Kyle Connor at Out of Spec Motoring on YouTube is great at this. Check out his channel linked below. Still, translating the charge curve from dozens of cars into a comparison that would be useful would be pretty time consuming. We'll get to that, but first I want to talk about the other aspect of road tripping in an EV, and that factor is efficiency. Not only must we consider a realistic charging speed like we just discussed, but how the car uses that power to get down the road as well. For example, vehicles like the Hummer EV may have fantastic charging speeds, but it also uses a ton of electricity, which means you'll be needing to recharge more power as well versus a car with the same charging speed but more efficiency. Luckily, there's an app called a Better Route Planner, which factors in both of these features. Not only has ABRP approximated the charge curve for most EVs for sale in the market today, as you can see by one of the creators' posts here, it also takes into account the efficiency of these cars. With these two factors combined, ABRP becomes the best tool I know of to compare road trip speeds across several different types of cars. Please note, however, one thing ABRP is not so good at is preparing you for broken or fully occupied charge locations along the trip. If you have a non-Tesla EV, you've been warned. Knowing I wanted to compare the true road trip efficiency of cars, factoring in charge curve and how the car uses the electricity, I set off to design some simulations using ABRP. To do this, I created three imaginary trips that were lengthy and also covered various parts of the USA. This would test the car's abilities with different charging infrastructure, like how frequently you can find a charger, but also different charging speeds along the way. Here are the three trips I selected in ABRP. The trips out west are to show how altitude changes and infrequent charging can affect the plan. The trip along the I-95 corridor is to show what might be almost ideal conditions for an EV road trip, with lots of charging infrastructure along the route and a relatively flat journey. If you have other ideas for a great test route like Maine to California or perhaps coast to coast in Canada, let me know. In terms of what cars I chose, I selected ones that were either popular or I had a personal interest in. Let me know if I left one off that you think I should have included, and I'll add it to the next round of these simulations. To track all these results, I created a spreadsheet to record the spec of each car I wanted to simulate. Then I manually entered a route into ABRP and selected each car one by one, recording the charging time and driving time for each car on each trip. If you do this, make sure your maximum speed is what you want it to be, since mine kept defaulting to 26 miles an hour for some reason. Once I had recorded the data for each car across the three routes, I averaged the time spent in each car driving versus charging to come up with a ratio, expressed here as a percentage. The higher the number, that means the more time you've spent driving versus charging. That's a good thing. Lower percentages here show you'll be spending more time charging and less time driving. For example, based on ABRP and the routes I selected, the Ford Lightning will cause you to be charging about 1/3 of the time compared to 2/3 of your trip spent driving. Now I wanted to illustrate the results so I could easily compare them. I ranked the cars based on total road trip time, then put them in a stacked bar graph to show the total trip time as a sum of separate charging and driving times. Again, these are averages across three routes I talked about as estimated by ABRP, which took place on March 10th, 2023. On the x-axis below, you can see the lengthy, fictitious model name I came up with for the cars by adding all the attributes of the car into one long string. On the y-axis, you can see the total drive time, which most people would want to be as low or as short as possible. The cars on the right-hand side of the chart are the best ones at road tripping based on the ABRP simulation I did, and the ones on the left will slow you down on a road trip. There were a few surprises here, like, for example, how efficient the Rivians appear to be. These are relatively large and square-shaped trucks, which I would have thought hurt efficiency. I also thought they would land much closer to something like the extended range Lightning, for example. However, as you can see in the top half, you find the Rivians. These Rivians are in the top half for efficiency, and this brings up two important points. One, if your car or the Charger are not able to deliver what is estimated in the curve by ABRP, for example, then it's going to affect your road trip efficiency. Maybe the Charger's state of repair is down. Maybe the car's battery temperature is too high. Maybe the car's state of charge is too high. If any of these factors come into play, it's going to affect your road trip time. So don't take these as necessarily the realistic result of what you're going to see. For example, I've heard a few Rivian owners complaining about how their Rivians are not meeting peak charging speeds as frequently or as long as they would hope. The second factor in how your efficiency is going to be affected is how you're driving and what conditions you're driving in. If you drive at 90 miles an hour and you're headed into headwinds the whole way, and it's raining and your heat's blasting and you have low tire pressures because they're not set correctly, you will also not match the estimates in these simulations. However, for as close of a like-to-like comparison as we can get, this is the best estimate I know of when comparing different cars from different manufacturers. So my point is, real-world results might differ from what we see in ABRP simulations here. Apart from the Rivian example, most of the results here were pretty much what I expected. The Lightning, for example, standard range was way down on the left-hand side as a very inefficient road tripping vehicle. This is due to its inefficient use of electricity and somewhat slow charging speeds that are a little disappointing for a vehicle of that size and efficiency. The other end of this spectrum is my own Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive long range, super efficient, and I don't think anyone's surprised to see that there. I was a little disappointed to see the Mach-E didn't do so well. It was kind of mid-pack, I guess. I really like those as well. I'd consider buying one, but mid-pack it would be a downgrade, let's say, considering what I have with the Model 3 today. So what do you think? Let me know below what cars or routes I left out that you would include next time. What do you think of this simulation? How would you simulate a trip like this? And do these results affect what EVs you might shop for? Or for that matter, what gas cars you might shop for, knowing what it's like to road trip with an EV based on these results? Let me know below, and thanks for watching Mind of Matter on YouTube.